we've got a very cool event for you all. So I'm Halsey. I am currently a psychiatry resident in Boston, but I graduated from Yale this last spring and was involved with the YPSG group. And one of the things that we've been trying to put together for a little while is this panel, which is going to be, I think, a very cool event. Very excited for this. We've got a great lineup of folks who are here to speak about their experience as veterans working in nonprofit and clinical settings to provide access and promote access to psychedelic treatments for veterans suffering from PTSD. And so in just a couple minutes, we're gonna let them introduce themselves. We've got Ian Benouis and Jesse Gould here on the call, and hopefully they'll be joined by our friend Mike in just a few moments. I think before we dive in, I just actually want to say a few words. So actually, we had an additional member of the panel who was not able to, who was initially planned to be on the panel, but actually passed away a few months ago. A guy named Matt Kale, who was supposed to be joining us. And so I think before we, some of you may be familiar with him. Actually, we had a screening last spring of the film From Shock to Awe, in which Matt was featured, and he was part of the inspiration for this panel here. So we're very sad that he's passed and not able to be with us tonight. One of our panelists, Ian, has actually worked with Matt. Is going to be able to say a little bit about who he was and what this work meant.
Sure thing. Thanks, Halsey. Yeah, and so I knew Matt really well and been working with him for like the past 5-6 years. And he was a gunner that had 2 deployments and spent a total of 4 years in Afghanistan with the 101st Airborne Division, and was medevaced out after getting exploded in his second time over there. And yeah, as you said, he was in shock to awe, and we went to Peru together for ayahuascas and Soldiers of the Vine, and we protested in front of the VA, the cannabis policy at the time. It was featured in Stone Vets on Viceland. And so we've done a lot of these things together. And beyond that, Matt is the person that got PTSD as a medical condition in Colorado with cannabis, and led Veterans for Natural Rights in the decriminalization initiative out of Denver. So he's a real true pioneer and trailblazer in all this. And it's a really sad that as these things continue to go more mainstream, that Matt's not around to help be part of that and celebrating these successes. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ian.
I can just jump in briefly. Yeah, well, thanks again, Ian, for that. And then, sorry, is like to follow that up with something very trivial, just like the typical etiquette here for the Zoom room stuff. So a lot of this is probably going to be Q&A, but just in the meantime, if you could leave yourselves muted, and then when we get to the Q&A portion, use the raise hand feature. And then we'll kind of have a queue, and then we can go through question by person. You can ask your question. We'll unmute you when the time comes for that. Yeah, simple Zoom room stuff. But with all that administrative stuff out of the way, I want to dive in now. So thank you, Ian and Jesse, for sharing your time and your energy with us. Really appreciate it.
And we have Mike now on the call as well.
We do.
Mike Dowd as well. So.
Wait, very cool. Is that, sorry,
Hey guys, I'm here.
All right, wonderful. Oh, I didn't realize that Michael's iPhone. Okay, apologies. silly me. Well, thank you. Now we got Mike, Ian, and Jesse here. And I'll say briefly, I'm really excited for this because in some ways, with the research on MDMA, that's sort of been like the spearhead for a lot of the research on psychedelics in the past few decades. So much of it is focused on veteran populations, at least initially. And yet I feel like, for me, at least personally, I haven't like really delved into that particular area of like kind of the intersection of veterans and psychedelics, even though in some ways it's been like so foundational to all that's been going on for the past 10, 20 years in this space. So really grateful to have the three of you here to talk about that and shed some light on what's going on in this area. So thank you. I guess we can just go, why not, by alphabetical order. So Ian, that'll be you first. If you can tell us a little bit about your background, what you've been doing, and where you're hoping to see things go. That'd be great.
Sure. Working with lots of veterans to address PTSD, TBI, and addiction, right? And taking vets down to Mexico and Peru, and these days mostly focused in the U.S. And I was patient number one in the Crossroads program back in 2016 to do Toad and Iboga, and that was personally super helpful to me. And now we've had over 400 other special operators go through there, and now it's we're in a position to start affecting policy. So where I want to see this go is, let's see, federal decrim, all these psychedelics in the short term move to Schedule 5, and then we have a right to grow and a right to borrow, and we can get on with it. So that's what I'm planning for.
And sorry, if I can just clarify, Ian, you do have a background in law, is that correct?
I'm an attorney as well, so I'm the General Counsel for the Mission Within, the clinic. It's a reincarnation of Crossroads, which used to be primarily focused on addiction, and now is focused on human optimization with specific attention to veterans and special operators within that.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Jesse, if we're keeping going by alphabetical order, you're next.
Yeah, let's do it. It's good to see everybody. Some familiar faces, some familiar names. David, I'm glad you made it. He just arrived. And yeah, just also want to pay my respects to Matt. All of what we're doing here is based off of the work of others that may or may not get the recognition. Some do, some don't, but they're all what have brought us here. And Matt's one of those people, absolutely. And had the pleasure to meet him and all the team that did From Shock to Awe. And so, yeah, definitely hard news to take, but we're progressed as a part of his work. So I'm Jesse Gould. I was an Army Ranger as relates to this story, and had numerous deployments to Afghanistan. And when I got out, I was going into finance and hit my own mental health walls, and just quickly saw how limited the options were available for people like me, and also just all sorts of other systematic issues with the VA, with diagnostics, with everything related to mental health. So I just found myself in a situation where the options were not helpful, and there was no other options. So psychedelics came across my radar, and I'm coming from a DARE generation, just say no, and all drugs will make you a bad person or a criminal. But I had no other choice and found ayahuasca, fortunately, and just sort of took this leap of faith and went to Peru, and partook in week-long indigenous ceremonies, and it was very challenging, but profoundly changed my life. And I just saw all these amazing stories around me, and changed my perspective on what these substances, these plants actually are. And that became sort of the inspiration and obligation in a lot of ways to create Heroic Hearts Project, which after I did, just took a life of its own. And come next year, be operating nearly 5 years, and just really spreading the word, trying to connect veterans to these modalities in all shapes and forms. And then to Ian's point, build the infrastructure, the community around it. And that's the key to all of this. You know, there's a lot of excitement around psychedelics, and now we have to temper that a little bit and build the infrastructure and what is actually going to sustain this healing and sustain the progress that we made. And that is community, that is localized healing, which Ian has been, you know, a leader of. And so, yeah, that's where we're at. And, you know, I was just figuring out ways to push that forward. We've been active in policy across the country and in different countries as well. And also a few research projects with various universities in a few different countries. So just trying to push it forward on a few different levels.
Awesome, very cool. Plenty to ask about when we get to the Q&A, so thank you for sharing. Mike, last but not least, if you can just, you know, tell us a little bit about your background and what you've been up to and where you're trying to take things.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm Mbo Dmt. I spent almost 10 years as a Navy SEAL, deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan. I was an instructor for a while, and then I got out in 2017. Finished business school, went the corporate route, thought that was like my next step in life. And I immediately, like almost to the month I got out of the Navy, just started all those like physical and mental and emotional issues started to like surface. And for the longest time, I thought it was just missing my community and thought they were things that I could fix on my own. And I started to realize all of the blast injuries and the things that the VA said may or may not affect you down the road were hitting me full force. Severe depression. My brain stopped producing like major hormones that are necessary to live. And I just, the whole time I couldn't get out of bed. I went from just peak performance physically to laying in bed and not knowing like what to do next. And anyway, went through a long bout of hormone therapy and just normal therapy, and none of it was really doing the trick in my thought process in my brain. And also very much against drugs my whole life, never smoked weed or anything like that. And then somebody was like, hey, you want to try this psychedelic? It was 5-MeO DMT. Started off nice and big. And, you know, I was so desperate at the time for help that I was like, yeah, why not? What could it hurt? I was rock bottom. And I tried it. And my intention was, I have kids, and my 6-year-old son would look at a flower with a bee on it, and he would start giggling and want to play with that flower. And I thought, you know what, if I could laugh or care about anything as much as he does about that one little thing, that's my goal. If I could just one thing in life care about as much as he does, that I would be good. And I went through this just profound experience. And since then it opened me up to, you know, psilocybin, ketamine, a whole bunch of different modalities. And it has changed my life. It has changed my thought process, my cognitive function. I have tested every so often, and my my cognitive function is increasing. My happiness is back to where I was prior to the military. It's not a wonder drug. It's human performance in the brain. And for so long in the SEAL teams, we were just all about physical performance. No one ever really said, hey, by the way, you need to train this. And so I've been really grateful. I started consulting for a company called Field Trip. They're a psychedelic-based public company here in Los Angeles. And I consult with the veteran program to try to get more vets involved in this kind of psychedelic work. And then to what you had asked about, where do I want this to go? I want to see every combat veteran who gets out of the military or even post-deployment, mandatory psychedelic therapy. I think it is life-changing, and it should be mandatory to, like, it's an uphill battle, but I think once people see it, they realize it's amazing.
That's quite the dream. A very cool goal to think about. I mean, and thank you all for those comments. So I think we're going to open this up to kind of a general Q&A session here. So invite folks to use the raise hand function to, let yourself be known, we can get you off mute and you can ask your question. But while we're kind of figuring that out, I'd like to start and actually kind of ask something to the point of what Michael, you were just talking about. I mean, I think each of you have your own personal experiences with psychedelic treatments and have made it part of your lives to become advocates for the expansion of these and greater access. And I'm just very curious to hear, because I think some of you also mentioned, that this was sort of in some ways in conflict with certainly, dare culture, as Jesse mentioned, and maybe just sort of a general military culture around substance use. What is your experience like in raising psychedelics? How do you feel that these are perceived, and when you are talking to veterans who are experiencing PTSD and other mental health conditions that might benefit from them?
So I mean, it's changed a lot. And Ian's been in this much longer than I have, but even in the time I've been in it, it's conversations now are much different now that there's been sort of a pretty good stream of veterans seeking this out and being successful in their journeys with psychedelics. And so you're having sort of a different platform. But even at the beginning, I mean, the motivation of starting Heroic Hearts was I reached out to guys that were still in, that were out, and kind of told them of my own journey. And I was like, hey, I just did this and it seemed to be helpful. Is this crazy? And they're like, well, one, yeah, but two, teach their own. If it works, and it works. And I think that's a very veteran mentality, where it's less about like what it is, but more about the functionality, more about getting you to complete the mission to use the military phrase. And so I think that's kind of why it's been so much accepted, is just like, nothing else works, you say this works, and the more, and that's really the beauty of the community too, is that there's a built-in trust with other veterans. So if they see somebody that they know and respect and that's gone through it, then that's sort of the thing that will allow them, even with some nerves going, to do something like what Michael was saying, of like somebody that he probably respected just brought him to that. And that's kind of what we've all been doing. And again, that reaches back to community. You still hit some roads, you still hit some sort of old school stigmas around psychedelics and all that kind of stuff. That's inevitable, and to each their own. I don't necessarily think this is for everybody, and I think certain people are just gonna go their path and or want to approach it in different ways. That's kind of inevitable. But what we've also found just with policy is, even on the politician side, it's actually surprised a lot of lobbyists or people who've been in this game for a while, where when it's presented by certain individuals and veterans in this case, we're actually finding people listen. We're actually finding people might actually change their opinion, or at least get on the borderline there, which is more so than a lot of other initiatives sort of get the ability to get there. So, I mean, it is powerful. It is, a lot of these initiatives around the country have really sort of utilized the veteran voice for that sake, because it seems to be something that across the board on with so much divisiveness, we can all sort of agree on, just because even outside of the veteran landscape, there's just a lot of trauma out there. There's a lot of mental health issues, and what can benefit this group here particularly can benefit the rest of the world. And so that's kind of what we're all here, I think, pushing for in our own ways.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say that the stigma is quickly dissolving, because of the fact that veterans are really at the end of their ropes in many of these cases if they've been on 20 or 30 medications a day, and we're using alcohol, and then the side effects of the medications can lead to suicide and suicidal ideations. Then you've got the rest of society that's got a depression crisis, an opiate crisis, an overdose crisis, and the rest of society is seeing mental health. So I think kind of at a national level, everybody's realizing, wow, we got some serious mental health issues, and they can look at the veterans as the ones that are really, getting ahead on that issue. And like Jesse's saying too, it's the part of the cultural equation where we can bring all the different sides together. Everybody can, and they can see the courage the veterans have to do the work on themselves, and then that's useful for everybody. So it's both people, just the dead end of these the pharmaceutical process, and enough people in the military community that are then sharing those voices, having positive experiences, and making documentaries, and talking to lawmakers, and talking to other people of influence. So 2022 is going to be an incredible year for all of us.
Is there anything in particular you're looking forward to in 2022 that?
Well, I think we could have some major movements on the front of, I don't want to say something like descheduling psychedelics, but significant reschedules. And if when psilocybin becomes an FDA approved drug, I don't see how the rest of the scheduling can hold on. So it's hard to obviously guess, Senate and presidential politics, but the time is right to fix all this stuff. So I just see big movements happening. Germany just said they're legalizing cannabis. So Mexico said that, and we're waiting for the program to roll out. So and then now money and the cultures got involved in the U.S. So the money around psychedelics and cannabis, and now the cultural aspect, and you said Wonderland right in Miami. So everyone's paying attention. So at least it gives the political background to be able to make some huge changes. Whether those can manifest politically, I sure hope so.
I'll take a question from the audience here. So Mohammed, I'll ask you to unmute and then go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Okay, cool. Hello. Thank you for being here. Aside from your first DMT experience, did you undergo any further psychedelic therapy? And how did that compare to your initial experience? Is my question.
I assume you're speaking to me?
To whoever would like to reply, but yes.
Okay. So yeah, the DMT was my first time, and it was with a shaman, not a doctor or anything clinical, and it was just this amazing experience at a friend's house. And then I went through formal treatment. I did about 6 sessions through field trip with ketamine, with the ketamine-assisted therapy injections. That was just over the top. It just one after the next. You felt yourself healing every time and getting a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper into what I was working on. And then since then, I've worked with psilocybin a lot, like microdosing weekly, macrodosing, I'd say a couple times a month. And I don't think any one treatment was the key. I think all of it was helpful.
Thank you so much. So correct me if I misheard, but did all 3 of you have initial DMT experiences? Or did I mishear that?
I mean, yeah. Ian, what was yours? Mine was mine was
go for it, man.
ayahuasca.
Yeah, I smoked
Yeah.
DMT back in Mexico, Palenque, with Ann Shulgin's daughter. Let's see, yeah, back in 1996, did the classic 3 tokes with the pipe and the mothball smelling stuff, and yeah, it was totally amazing. And I kept going after that. Within a year or two, I got to do ayahuasca for the first time, and that was a lot more efficient and easy to process, right? Not getting shot out of the cannon. Instead, you're kind of cruising down the river and still taking in the visual information, but not as much as one time. So yeah, that's I've both of those valuable, and more like getting the DMT and the ayahuasca. It's definitely been useful to me. So.
My Iowa was anything but a cruise, so I'm glad you got the cruise, Ian. I got the whitewater rapid, but yeah, mine was Aya, and I think you'll see, and I think that's sort of the paradigm shift that needs to happen too, because we get this question a lot in terms of like, oh, do people go back? Should I go back? Because we view it in this sort of Western context of medication, of you need to take this monthly, you need to take this semi-annually, we need to take this on this sort of calendar schedule, as opposed to listening to what you actually need, right? And the whole point of this, the whole point of psychedelic work is, one, sort of expanding yourself and expanding your happiness or contentment, for lack of a better sort of expression around it, but also understanding more of what your body's needing at a very basic level. So it's connecting you to your intuition. And so that's kind of what we tell veterans. Like, it doesn't matter. It's fine if you go back. It doesn't mean you're addicted to it. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, but know why you're going back. Go back with intention. Go back with understanding what you're looking to address. Or if you're doing it kind of more in a recreational side, know that you're doing it for that, but don't mistake the two. Don't mistake like those sort of things, because that's where it kind of gets more on the dependence course of, like, if you're just looking for easy answers, or your life's getting hard but you're not making the fundamental changes, then that kind of starts morphing into a dependence. And that's kind of what we want to avoid, generally speaking, because that's not good for anything. It's with any substance, if you take too much, or you're doing it in a way that's not empowering you, then it's you're gonna find yourself in a bad spot at some point.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, because I found it interesting that all 3 of you had very profound DMT experiences, because psilocybin, ketamine, and MDMA are getting a lot of the attention behind PTSD research, but DMT doesn't really come up in press or in research very much. So I was just interested in what your take on the progression of DMT as medicine is. Whoever.
If I
I'll
could
just
jump in quickly to clarify, I'm pretty sure it was 5-MeO DMT.
Yes.
Which, not to jump in, like, get too far into the weeds, but 5-MeO DMT is different than DMT in a few important ways. But anyway, yeah, I don't want to, like, just to make sure. Correct me if I was wrong, guys, but I just wanted to make sure that was clear, that we're talking about 5-MeO versus DMT. And then one aside is, there actually is a tiny bit of DMT research going on at Yale, or about to start at Yale, actually, for depression, but no 5-MeO that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and both can be effective. And if you actually look at one of the starts of this, is one of the big like pillars is Rick Strassman's research on DMT at the University of New Mexico. It was like this weird blip that he could actually get that approved. I'd say sort of in terms of a research model, or in terms of that, it's a little bit trickier, because DMT is metabolized very quickly in the body. And so it's kind of like what Ian was saying, where if you're just doing DMT or 5-MeO, it tends to be more of a rocket ship. But then if you're doing it more in the ayahuasca phase, where it's metabolized and it spreads out longer, then that's much harder to control. And so what the models are looking for right now, because there's actually some sort of economic model behind it, are things where we can still make it to like a very basic chemical element and control that factor, but then still have a more therapeutic dose. And so that's where you get in synthetic psilocybin, That's where you get an MDMA, where these lend themselves to having longer therapeutic usages in sort of a model that we know. Whereas if you just gave somebody a blast of 5-MeO through an FDA trial, it's probably going to be a little bit of a rocky sort of path to get through there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll throw in a small plug. So I actually did a little bit of 5-MeO DMT research before medical school with Crossroads Treatment Center, actually, which I think we mentioned briefly. And so they did find from Crossroads that they were giving people the mystical experience questionnaire, and which is commonly used in psilocybin research, and finding that I want to say they were either more or less no statistically significant differences on the MEQ, or that 5-MeO might have been a little bit higher. And with a lot of the interest being around, is the mystical experience and part of what is contributing to these long-term benefits from these treatments. So, and I know in the years since that, Alan Davis, who's at Johns Hopkins, has been doing a little bit of research and is interested in 5-MeO DMT. He also used to be, help out with research at Crossroads. So it's definitely on folks' radar within kind of or at least within on some people's radar within kind of the ivory towers of psychedelics research. But yeah, it's definitely not at the forefront yet, but it could be maybe in a few or several years. We'll see. Thanks for the questions. I'm gonna Colin, you have your hand raised, so I'll let you ask some questions if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. This question is specifically for Jesse, but thank you to all three of you for being here. And I'm a psychiatry resident at UCLA and getting started in the work in this field. I was just interested, Jesse, when you mentioned this idea of kind of using psychedelics and having it form a dependence. I think, we classically think about psychedelics as like not being, necessarily habit forming like other substances. And I think that is one of the things that gets highlighted a lot in the press. But as you mentioned, pretty much anything can develop kind of like a psychological dependence. I'm wondering if you've seen that in some of the veterans you've worked with, and maybe you could just like expand on that concern a little bit, that we should probably have our eyes open to as we expand the access to these.
Yeah, and I'll throw it over to Ian afterwards too, because he might have some more hands-on experience with some of this. I mean, the value, the beauty of psychedelics, the traditional ones, the hallucinogenics, is that there's no, chemical addictive properties, right? So it flies in the face of Schedule 1 drugs, as much of everything around psychedelics does. There's difference a little bit with the ketamine side, and that's a different context, that's a different argument, that's a different rabbit hole to go down. But if we're just talking about the hallucinogenics, then there's not that straight sort of thing. But as with anything, there's that habitual addiction. If we have a hamburger every day for lunch, if the day we don't have the hamburger, we're going to crave it. Or if we don't have hamburger for, whatever, you're going to crave it. It's kind of that same sort of thing. This one tends to be a little bit more complex, is because we're dealing with deep psychological issues where there does tend to be this sort of reset, and there is this profoundness that comes from the psychedelic experience. When you're in it, it does seem, and realistically, you are sort of connected to a baseline, right, and North Star guiding path, right? And you do feel things are aligned, you do like understand yourself. Then life happens, things get more complicated. And when you're not necessarily guided, or you're not necessarily supported, then you don't make the necessary changes in your life that are necessary to actually make your life better. And so that's where sometimes what I see as a dependence comes along, because people use that as an easy answer. Because at least for that moment and for the few weeks that follow, which often is called the honeymoon phase, then you get back on that path. But that's where discipline, that's where this infrastructure that is lacking comes into play. And I'd fault that less on the psychedelics. I would fault that more on the lack of infrastructure, on the fact that these have been made illegal, and that we haven't been able to develop a strong support system for it. And even when they do become illegal and more accessible, there's going to be a severe lacking of practitioners, guides, sitters, all this kind of stuff, because of the very nature of prohibition. It sort of skews any sort of system, which is why it's so detrimental to, and has ripple effects across economic, social, name it, sort of systems. So it is something to watch out for. But at the end of the day, it goes back to having that understanding of where the person's coming from, right? And this should be the baseline of psychiatry. It should be the baseline of coaching. Is we're not, if we get too focused on you have PTSD or you have depression, then we're missing the rest of the picture. But if we understand why and some of these outside aspects of why people are suffering and struggling, then we'll see that if they are using psychedelics to just get back to that sort of easy answer and not exercising again, not eating healthy again, then we can kind of work with them a little bit more in a much more comprehensive way. And that's where mental health needs to go. Unfortunately, the insurance model and the current systems, economic systems, don't support that. So that's what we all need. How do we make that economic system more sustainable to where we have longer care, we have more one-on-one care, knowing where the person comes from. So just a quick case in point is that PTSD veterans is this term of all sorts of different ailments. That means all sorts of different things, including traumatic brain injury, just because like you're a veteran, you're suffering, you have PTSD, here is medication. It has no sort of basis and all this kind of stuff. What we found, and most psychedelic practitioners will tell you, I mean, there's research that support this, is a huge percentage of the people that we work with have a baseline traumatic issue from childhood, some sort of childhood abuse. And oftentimes when they go through these major psychedelic experiences, it actually kind of just like swipes through, processes through their military experience, their military trauma, and goes point like that spotlight right to that childhood trauma, which is where all of this other stuff built its foundation. And if you just classify this person as having PTSD, then you're going to miss all that kind of stuff. You're going to miss the person, this bigger concept. So this is sort of the shift that we need to happen. Unfortunately, psychedelics are bringing this in if we listen to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was very, very insightful. Really appreciate that.
Cool. And Jerry, you'll be next with the question. And for folks who have showed up kind of late here, just to clarify, apologies that I'm repeating myself for everyone else. If you have a question you want to ask, just raise your hand using the Zoom function, and then we'll ask you to unmute and you can ask a question. All right. So Jerry is next. If I can, there you go.
Well, first of all, let me apologize and at the beginning for perhaps not being clear, but you just mentioned the trauma of war, and I wondered how it's changed your perspective, you know, for all three of you, in terms of war itself, because often psychedelic experiences provide insights, they provide new ways of looking at things and so forth. And I've wondered how it's changed your view of the experience of being in a combat zone and war and then coming back to civilian life.
I guess I'll start by saying for me, psychedelics, they weren't helping. At least I didn't ever need help curing PTSD, right? We all get out, all special operators, they get out and they're all diagnosed with PTSD, because PTSD by definition it's like something you saw that was traumatic. Okay, well, everything in war is traumatic, so you can't go to war without having PTSD. But most of the guys I work with, Rangers, Green Berets, Marines, SEALs, they're not they're not regretting what they did. They don't have like sad times about what happened, because their training was so rigorous that oftentimes they're just prepared for the things they saw and did. But the thing that most of the people I've worked with, and myself included, it was the brain injury, the TBI. And the TBI was, for me, messed my brain up in ways like my thought process and things, the way I slept, my hypervigilance, things like that, things that aren't necessarily registering as like a traumatic event. And so in using psychedelics, for me, it was more of a healing process, and like trying to redevelop the brain and get clarity. And after, I've been out for, so the last time I was in war was 2013. So it's been quite a few years. I look at it almost the same as before. I just look at, I've taken away the idealism. No longer do I see it as, oh, we're fighting for democracy and fighting for our country. We're, there's specific things that have to get done for the government's agenda. And war is just animals. War is human beings at their most base element. There's no discussion. There's no academia, thought process. It's just take as much as you can and do whatever you have to do to get it. And I feel like most veterans, once they've gone to war, they've seen behind the curtain a little bit of how society interacts with one another, and these facades we put up when we walk out of our house every morning. And I think I'll speak for myself that there was a little bit of depression just in the idea of, I've seen behind this curtain and I know how humans actually interact. And now I'm in this almost like this matrix world where people are fake. They're abiding by society and rule of law and things that like are just kind of made up, and we sign the social contract that we agree to act in a certain way. But once you see people act like animals, it's really hard to get rid of that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Is there anybody else who has some
Sure.
idea about this?
I'll jump in and say that my specific experience was as a Blackhawk helicopter pilot in Panama for Operation Just Cause, which is like a big drug war operation. So, General Noriega, who was running the country, who was on the books for the CIA and DEA and all these other things, was basically our drug kingpin gone a little rogue, and so we used all these assets and high-tech equipment and put people's lives in the line to go basically fight what's still part of the drug war. And I totally agree with everything that Jesse was saying before about the whole prohibition just being this overriding thing that creates all these otherwise bad behaviors. So for me, I want to end the drug war because I think that's a higher social issue than like war itself. I think war itself is we've taken it as far as we go. The planet's networked up. It's very hard to go prosecute other kinds of things in other part of the world because it's still going to come back and touch you. So it's much more around economics, and that's why these drugs have been illegal, is because of the economic reality. So if veterans can get us to the end of the drug war, I'll be even happier about my service in getting to the end of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add, if the base of the question is if we think psychedelics will sort of end war in general or end that sort of repeating cycle, I don't think so. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't change necessarily. It changes some dynamics, but it doesn't change some of these underlying things that have been going on since the dawn of humanity. if that's something to change, if it is possible, I think it depends on the infrastructure of certain societies of building up these things to make it impossible. You know, the psychedelic at its core is a baseline healing. It's the individual healing, you know, sort of that thing of like, you have to heal yourself to heal the world. So, I mean, maybe on that sort of thing. But, you know, I've seen a lot of people that have gone through psychedelic healing and stuff, and they're still not necessarily the greatest people themselves either. You know, it can have some other dynamics to it as well. I don't know. I've just never. I think it's hard. I think there's some sort of, I don't want to say inevitability, but I've just never seen examples in history where that is not the case. And so I think then you just kind of have to figure out to have a society that incorporates that sort of violence in a more just way, if you can associate that word with it. And so I think you can make the argument with the US that we've kind of gone astray of that, where I do think those that sign up, similar to what Michael's saying, we're doing it for noble and idealistic ways. And I do think there's an archetype for that of the soldier, the warrior. And there's always been a need for that. And if it's used incorrectly, if it's used for ulterior means or for other people's benefit or wealth or what have you, then that's when you cause this sort of ripple effect. And I think you're kind of seeing that now with a lot of these sort of endless wars. So the question is, if there is that thing that we can't solve, like how do we at least make the structure, the society to where it's not being utilized as badly as it has been?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
Thanks for those answers, everyone. Going on to the next person, Chi, you can unmute yourself and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. First, I want to say thank you for your services. Thank you for your time and for sharing your story. I have a two-part question. The first one is looking at different psychedelic therapies, MDMA, psilocybins, ketamine, ayahuasca. Like, how do you recommend one versus another if someone was to ask?
You have to kind of avoid recommending, because that puts you up for liability right now. We kind of know a little bit, but like anybody who says like this is for that is generally doesn't. I'd be cautious of that person with few exceptions. There's no, and that's the complexity of this is, especially, you know, like a lot of the organics like psilocybin and ayahuasca, they're complex molecules interacting with a complex brain. It's not going to be a 1-for-1 Tylenol for headache like we're used to. And so I think, again, that's one of those concepts we have to get sort of change our perspective about. And that can be kind of the hard thing on our side too, is ayahuasca or psilocybin or DMT somebody can go in there with OCD or depression or anxiety and be completely relieved of it. Another person can have some of those same issues and have minor effects, or maybe it doesn't touch those sort of things. Some people come out of ayahuasca never wanting to drink again. Some people will go back to the bar. It's hard to do this sort of diagnostic kind of thing. And I'm very much personally opposed to saying like psilocybin is for depression or ayahuasca is for PTSD or what have you. I think that's sort of an easy FDA model that's not going to work out in the long run. There's certain things. There's like contraindications. Each one's a little bit different. There's different intensities. There's different preparations, lengths of time. So all those kind of come into, again, knowing the individual. So just kind of quick. Ketamine has the benefit that you can use it if the person's on like SSRIs or something like that. So potentially can help somebody come off that like suicidal ideation ledge. And then maybe that opens up other aspects and use it in this longer term protocol. But, you know, something like ayahuasca, you're not going to want, if they're on a lot of medications, and just can't work for them until you get them to a better spot. So you just kind of have to understand where the person's at and what different aspects work. And then I think as we get to know better, and that's where the shaman or the healer curandero comes in, it's a it's expanding it. It's like, where are they at in their healing journey? What messages, if you go to sort of the ayahuasca traditions, these are all teachers, right? So what lessons do they need? Not necessarily what do they need to be healed from, but what do they need in their life so that they can heal themselves?
Thank you for your answer. And yeah, it's so important to know the individual, because everyone's, issues, mindset, everything is so different and individualized. My second question is, either during or after taking these psychedelics, did you have someone to guide you through these experiences to impact what happened? And if you could have one, how can this person be helpful in the overall experience?
I'll jump in because.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I'll jump in because I know Jesse's heard me say this a bunch. You really need some sort of, I've always said, spiritual battle buddy as you go through this. It doesn't have to be necessarily a guide or an integration coach or whatever, but just somebody who's also been through the same experience, who's also had similar experiences as life, which is very important for veterans, who, as you're doing the work, you can have a reference point to. And, it's very hard in relationship when people have done the medicine, but not everyone in the relationship has, trying to be able to communicate that. So I think that's the best model, and that's the best model we used to have in the past, called your friends, right? Your friends can be there for you. So we need all these other resources as well, guides and therapists and integration coaches, but ultimately, I think the kind of spiritual battle buddy model is really key to get the medicine to be able to work over the long term.
Could not agree more. I've had somebody guide me through every journey I've ever done, and then my entire role, like I'm not a clinician, I'm not a doctor. My entire role is essentially a battle buddy for the veterans who come through our program. Just a face where somebody says, "Oh, you're a veteran. I trust you from your experience," and I just sit there and I basically, talk to them and stand next to them while they're tripping. And it's having that myself when I went through that was all I needed to know. Like, when I'm unconscious or subconscious, I'm not, like, something awful isn't going to happen to me. I have somebody right here holding my hand.
Yeah, the part of the reason I formed Heroic Hearts is when I went through it, it was just sort of going there and then kind of you're on your own. There was some guidelines and tips, but there really wasn't anything. It was just me going there by myself. And so we wanted to provide that support. And I think we all need that. And actually, we've seen results be much more impactful if we have preparation, people kind of getting their mindset going into it, having that peer support, and then that aftercare is where it's absolutely massively important. And that you're just going to hear more and more and more, because again, the psychedelic, the point of that profound change will only last if you have the systems, the infrastructure to support that, and that comes on that ground level peer support. And so that's going to be the thing that we're going to be, I think, needing to catch up on, of people that are comfortable with that and have their own experiences. And I think there'll be a little bit of a tiered system too, especially with ketamine as psilocybin become.
Sorry, Jesse, it looks like you're muted. I'm not sure what happened there.
Oh, yeah, my internet's unstable. But yeah, I think I got the point across.
Gotcha. Thank you. And if I can just jump in, y'all more or less answered a question that has been, more talked about in various settings, about, as clinicians or future clinicians, aspiring clinicians, do we have to be veterans or fill in the blank in order to treat people from that, demographic? And what if I'm hearing this right, it's, that's like having that, infrastructure, complementary infrastructure, whether it's a peer support, not necessarily the clinician or healer, but someone who can, accompany this person through the process at various stages, who also is a veteran and kind of shares that bond. That could be, it sounds like that's a really important ingredient. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of what I was, the theme I was picking out there. Yeah. So thanks for answering my question as well.
You're gonna see, it's a relationship, and we need many relationships. You're gonna see the clinician when you're having these really hard experiences or on a regular basis, but you need people to fill in the gaps. Otherwise, if you go back to a toxic friend group or family group, then you're just going to keep getting re-traumatized. If you don't have that support system on a daily or at least regular basis, if I don't have somebody that I can call to, if I'm having a crisis, if Michael doesn't have, I'm sure he has a lot of vets that come to him and just like text him like, hey, this is getting really hard again. That's what you need. And that has to be on that multi-tiered level.
I think to that point, I mean, I think, one of the questions that we had kind of going into this is really thinking about, how does the veteran population, as a population who's suffering from, whether it's PTSD, whether it's depression, how should psychedelic-assisted therapies be, in what ways should it be kind of tailored to, or could it be tailored to that specific population? I think, Jesse, you spoke a little bit before about how common, non service associated trauma was, and just how in some ways there are maybe it doesn't make sense to make these distinctions between kind of veteran and non-veteran populations in terms of what the treatments are that people need. But how do you guys see, what are their specific needs? What are things that people should be thinking about in terms of adapting these treatments specifically for veterans?
What I've seen from just the limited amount I've done, I have not spent half the time that these two other gentlemen have with patients, but depending on what medicine it is and how it affects the person, for instance, ketamine, the patients are basically paralyzed. They're just completely subdued. So there's not really like a security risk or anything there of freak out or anything like that. Or it's minimal, I should say. But that would be the only issue I would ever worry about. But the other thing is keeping in mind that like veterans, I watched this brief from a psychedelic company about prepping their therapist for veterans. And it was a 2-slide PowerPoint of what a veteran is educating. And I laughed so hard because I thought, man, we're just people, like it's the same pool that all jobs come from. It's just the same group of people. I think that's one of the hardest things for veterans is coming home, and there's this massive gap of knowledge between what a veteran is and what is what a veteran isn't, because only about 1% have served or are serving. So it's a very small group. But just treating veterans like normal humans, I think, is the first step. So often it's like, oh, veteran, tell me about this and tell me about that. And you're like, well, it's just like going to work for me, just like going to work for you. And there's so many similarities in trauma from any first responder, actually. So I think the comfort level, you can quickly build camaraderie and rapport with a veteran just by talking to them normally, and not maybe just not even mentioning the elephant in the room that, oh, you served in war and there's all these terrible things that may or may not have happened to you, but like, let's just get to know you as a person.
That's very helpful, yeah, perspective to hear. Yeah, thank you, Michael, for sharing your thoughts on that.
I'll go. Colin did have his hand raised. I don't know if he still's got a question.
Yeah, it was mostly answered. So I think we were all kind of thinking along the same lines. I was just kind of wondering if there were things that, advice that you might have for us who are interested in working with this field, specifically with vets. But I think we got that answered. Thank you.
I think it is beneficial, kind of like what Mike's role is, of like sometimes having that liaison just kind of helps break the ice. It is a community built on trust and support, and not wanting to be vulnerable in a way that psychedelics put you. And so having somebody that they can like, oh, this guy has my back, can just sort of be that helpful liaison there.
Well, I'll take this opportunity to ask a question, and it's mostly directed at Ian, and in the context of me not being much of a legal scholar. So you had mentioned earlier that your hope is that they'd be rescheduled to Schedule 5, and you said something about cultivation, if I recall correctly. And I'm just curious if you could expand a little bit upon that. What would it mean for these substances to become Schedule 5, and kind of what could flow from that change?
Sure. So right now, all these medicines that we're mostly talking about are Schedule 1. When MDMA gets FDA approval, and the same thing with psilocybin, they're going to have to be rescheduled off Schedule 1 because Schedule 1 says no medical value. So to be an FDA drug, for a drug, you can't be Schedule 1. But I think that the pharmaceutical companies, they don't want them to come all the way off the scheduling, because then they can't be written as drugs, right? The pharmaceutical companies need the scheduling to be able to make the medical claims, which is why on supplements, somebody says, oh, this may help with depression, but they can't make any medical claims on it. And so that along with that, you need to then have federal decriminalization, which just like, with the state decriminalization, where people could grow these things, and you'd have some sort of right to grow, right to barter, right to trade, where then you could grow the medicines your own at home. That way, you can still have the pharmaceutical company, right, that makes the medicine and sells the medicine. And if you want to go through your healthcare provider and your healthcare insurance and get it that way, you can do so. And if you want to be able to grow mushrooms at home, right, in your closet, and cannabis in your backyard or in your garage, you could be able to do so and treat yourself. And so, yeah, there's bills that are lined up to address that. And I think that getting to the full legalization, that's just further down the road. I don't think the pharmaceutical companies will let that happen in the short term, but that's the eventual ultimate goal.
Thanks for that clarification. And if I recall correctly, I read an article recently about Denver, which recently decriminalized psilocybin, and I think they're also trying to kind of amend that legislation maybe to include communal use. And so yeah, it sounds like, at least on a like a local level, that there are various places trying to kind of push the frontier forward a little bit in various ways. And I thought it was interesting with Denver in particular, that they're looking at communal and gifting, I think, were two of the things that they're trying to add on to their decriminalization.
Yeah, it's important to have these state level initiatives, like, right, we're in Oregon, and not just the decrim, but on the therapy part, and then the same thing coming in California, now these other states, like just saying Pennsylvania, whatnot. So, and then the local decrim initiatives, which you can do down at the city level, and then pressure at the national level on the scheduling setup. And again, when psilocin, 4-hydroxyl DMT, comes off the Schedule 1, let's say if that's in 2025, I don't see how you can argue that DMT or 5-MeO DMT or any of these other chemical cousins can stay on there. I think by then you'd have a lot of lawsuits. And Philip Morris, which now called Altria, right, has filed patents from 2016 that were granted in 2018 for putting DMT and 5-MeO DMT in a vape pen. So the big companies know where this is all going, and we just have to keep the pressure on so that yeah, these things can be accessed so we can help ourselves get out of this mental this health crisis that we're in.
I think this DMT vape pen from Philip Morris is gonna, I don't know whether that's the most dystopic thing I've ever heard or what to make of it, but.
Well, you know, yeah, he's right. But as long as we have those same rights, then we can make all this stuff at home and do it ourselves. That's what I'm all about, because otherwise, then it's still another form kind of government or corporate control, and then only people with the means and access can get to it. And these obviously natural plants, it's the reason that they can be grown and we have access to them is because they're designed to help us. So yeah, let's let's take advantage of the gifts that are already here.
Yeah, that's kind of the cool thing of seeing some of these decrim initiatives go, because they all build upon each other and see like how it can move forward. So that's what they're doing in Denver. The California SB 509 bill is sort of an extension of the previous decrim, and then has that communal access to push that, just to allow for these substances to be used how they've always been used without sort of the interference. And at the end of the day, that's kind of the cool thing of the Oregon initiative is it's kind of more of a to each their own with psilocybin. If you want to go to a clinic and you prefer going with a doctor, then you'll have that right. But if you want to go to a psilocybin circle with your friends or with people that you trust and respect, then you also have that right, which is exactly how it should be. And somebody mentioned that it is Rick Doblin's 60th birthday, and also Giving Tuesday for those that are feeling generous.
So a lot of you've all, I think, mentioned at various times kind of hopes and things that you're excited about, or kind of hopes for things that will happen in terms of greater access and legalization and promotion of treatments. I'm curious, like, what do you see as potential pitfalls, or are there what are ways in which you could see this going wrong, or things you worry about happening? Are there certain pitfalls you hope we avoid?
Yeah, I mean, I think what fortunately with the psychedelic realm, we are learning from the mistakes of the cannabis era, and there were mistakes, some of them unavoidable, but mistakes nonetheless. And so there has been, with a lot of these bills, with a lot of these movements, and still fortunate with a lot of the companies, there has been a very conscientious effort to push this forward in a good way, and hopefully an ethical and responsible way. And it has allowed some great organizations like Shafruna and to pause some of this stuff and like, hey, where's this coming from? Are we is this sustainable? Are we helping these groups that were taking some of these methods and technologies from? So I think that's sort of the thing to avoid, is that with speed and with progress, sometimes things get steamrolled, and sometimes we lose sight of where they come from and lose sight of the nature of how these work. Sometimes we just are sort of pointed towards just a straight edge legalization, but what happens in between there? How do we build the infrastructure that will make that helpful and viable? I'm not saying that to push that off, like they should be legal, but we also really need to focus on the in-between of what will empower people when it is legal to use it, to heal for it. Because like what you see with cannabis is it shouldn't have been illegal, but there's not really a lot of protocols, and physicians or therapists are not trained in how to effectively work with their patients with cannabis, because they weren't trained, and it just all kind of happened so fast. And so that's sort of what we need to look for, and that's kind of been sort of the push on different levels, whether state or federal, of like, hey, this tidal wave's coming, and we are grossly unequipped in terms of that infrastructure, in terms of the people that are trained. CIIS is cranking out people, MAPS is cranking out people and great practitioners, but it's not going to be enough. And just on our side, and I'm sure Mike has experienced the same, the amount of veterans that reach out to us on a very continuous basis is terrifying, of how many people who have been disserved by the current mental health system, the VA system, to where, by year end, we'll have 1,000 people on our wait list. And that is just going to balloon to crazy proportions, because there is a massive problem epidemic in terms of mental health. And so the quicker we accept that as a reality, and the quicker we accept that psychedelics are a viable pathway towards that, the better we can kind of work together, if that's possible, to make these options actually helpful for people.
I got another question here from Teresa. So I'll ask you to unmute and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, everybody. And thank you for being here, and thank you for serving for all of us. My question is kind of on a personal level. I've done ayahuasca once, and I've done DMT, which was really crazy. And I didn't grow up doing psychedelics. I've read so much about it. I'm incredibly intrigued by what it can do for people. And I think my question is, would you advise people not to do them on their own without the proper setting and somebody to walk you through it? Or do you think that people could still benefit without a lot of detriment, isn't the word I want to use? Would you think people could still benefit by doing it on a personal level, not with their friends? I don't want to do it in the backyard partying, in front of a fire with a couple of beers. I want to do it for my own growth, for my own awareness, I guess. I didn't really have this question prepared before I came on here, and I'm a little nervous, I guess, also. So I don't know. Did I make sense with my question?
Yeah. I'll answer that. I think it's all about the proper training. So once people have been given these medicines by people that are qualified to do so, and they've seen how those medicines work, then those people are in a position to be able to, take smaller amounts and work with them on their own. So I think that's what it's all about. We all know from the military, getting that good training, and then you have the support system of your other people that you're working with, and that are having your back and keeping an eye on you and checking in with you. But I don't think it's an either or, but it's better to get the full training up front before you work on yourself, by yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah, especially with bigger doses, you want to, I would recommend more so people having some sort of sitter, some sort of guide, just so you don't have to make the same mistakes, or so if it gets like a little bit heavy or a lot of stuff comes up, you have somebody there that can kind of keep you calm, as they call it, hold space, and kind of recommend. Most places have a psychedelic society. If you go to MAPS, they have like a list of practitioners or coaches or guides in various areas. And so you just can kind of, be cautious, because of those obviously legal substances in a lot of areas, but you have a lot of integration coaches that you can work with or can help guide you at least to establish a good framework.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I keep looking on all those sites and I can't find anything. I think there's maybe a couple in New York, but I'm in Connecticut. That's about the closest I found.
I really believe the process is almost as equal as the medicine. How many people we know have taken mushrooms at a party growing up and they were like, it was awful. And how many people have come to me and said, oh, well, ketamine, yeah, I snorted that once at a party and it was awful. And you take them out of that setting and you put them in a room with a therapist and an eye shade and music and discovery, like therapy before and after, and then it's life-changing, profound experience. So I really do think I don't know if it'd be a waste of a time, but the process I think is going to make the big experience people are looking for.
If I could just jump into, so first of all, thank you all for the input. You know, at the risk of being the party pooper here of a sort, you know, I think one thing that sometimes gets talked about, though maybe not enough, is the possibility that certain psychedelic experiences can in and of themselves be traumatizing, and that people can have these terrifying experiences, and you know, if they're not in the right setting and have support in place, you know, whether that's other, you know, a therapist or a friend or, you know, whatever that looks like, they can have truly terrifying and traumatizing experiences. So it's not like, you know, we're only dealing with a range of positive experiences. We're also dealing with this, you know, other side of the spectrum that can also cause a lot of issues. And I would say, I'm aware of like the Johns Hopkins research on like a bad trip, challenging experience, but in those, you know, the challenging experience, you know, potentially predicting actually positive outcomes, but that's even still in the setting of, you know, lots of preparation and the setting of trained therapists and all that. So just a word of caution that, you know, doing this stuff on your own without support, without preparation, you are to some extent, depending on the substance, depending on the dose, playing with fire a little bit. And yeah, I want to flag that because I think it is possible in some ways to actually do a fair bit of damage with these substances if used in kind of a reckless manner, if you will. So apologies if that was like the party pooper note there, but I definitely don't want anyone to get the sense that these are things that only do miracles and that you can't end up with some nightmarish experience that can haunt you for years to come.
I think that's a very valid point. We spend a lot of work in terms of like going to different practitioners and spots and stuff like that. And, you know, we wouldn't send vets to every single spot, and to each their own how they do it. But especially if you're dealing with a lot of trauma, you do want to be cautious of where you go. And to that point too, it's not a magic pill. And especially the bigger ones, they can bring up a lot of stuff and they make you super sensitive to everything around you. So you do have to understand what you're working with. These are powerful tools.
Thank you. And I guess I probably knew that answer, but I don't know. Since I can't find anybody to actually go and sit, you know, professionally with, I just thought I'd throw it out there. Thanks again.
So I think we're coming up here on time. So we probably only have time for maybe two more questions. Looks like we've got one from Alvaro. Alvaro, can you unmute yourself and ask away?
Excellent. Thanks so much, everyone, for putting this together. I'm curious if you could talk about or provide advice for someone that wants to work in this space and is not a psychiatrist or a physician or is not a counselor. So what pathways are there, either in the policy sector or in the business, or maybe their intersection? And if it's on the business side, like what advice can you give to stay away from the certain companies or firms that may end up doing a detriment to the costs because they may just be kind of reckless in how they market it or how they push it as kind of like the silver bullet we've been talking about. So hopefully that there was a question somewhere in there, and yeah, curious to hear your thoughts.
I mean, be pure in your intention yourself in terms of what you're looking for. And I guarantee you, if you come across the companies or people that are not doing that, then you're going to be somewhat, drawn away from them. It's sort of the alignment of intentions and what you're trying to do. And I think if you align with the people and you think that they're at the same course, and that's that personal judgment. Otherwise, for policy or business, do research and reach out. Generally speaking, volunteer. I know a lot of different people that are trying to do different policies, figure out where it came from. There's a lot of decriminalized nature spots in different places. There's a lot of initiatives. The easiest way is to reach out, do research, and volunteer potentially until you find a different footing.
So we have, I think we're almost at time here. And I'm going to grab the mic here and ask one more question here to end us. And it's one that has been popping around my mind and with what you have all been saying. I know kind of each of you is sort of in this space to some degree because of coming up against the limitations of the standard treatment through the VA. I think, Michael, you've spoken about how you're involved with Field Trip, which is, an enterprise trying to provide, in the private sector, these treatments. And, Ian and Jesse, I know, Ian, you're speaking a lot about, thinking about individual access. And so I'm just very curious what each of you thinks, what is the role of the VA and the future of psychedelics? Is there a role for it? I mean, do you see, how do you see the VA fitting into the future of all this?
I'll go first. I think the VA can be a great tool to roll this out a lot faster because it's basically one of the biggest health care organizations on the planet. And I don't know that the VA needs to provide all these services as far as post getting out, but the VA has a lot of power, kind of a bully pulpit to be open to these kind of treatments, and they're watching this stuff very carefully. So, yeah, I just there's no reason why the VA can't be after resisting this stuff for a long time, can't start doing a lot of studies and basically here in Texas we've got Bill HB 1802, which allows veterans from all across the country that have any kind of diagnosis with PTSD to come and receive mushrooms. But right now the study hasn't kicked in because there's no money for it. So if the VA says we got money, then all of a sudden you can start treating thousands of veterans. So the VA has a lot of power as the bully pulpit, and then being able to send money to send grants and start some of this happening. So.
Yeah, I mean, like to Ian's point, it's the VA is unavoidable, and nor should it be. I mean, like that's the first line of defense for vets. That's the socialized care for vets, and there's never going to be sort of like I said, a lot of these vets that need this help can't afford insurance or anything outside of that, and so you need a system like the VA to help them out. It's absolutely essential. So getting the therapists on board and being able to deal with psychedelic treatments or treatments based on cannabis and a little bit more informed that would help out immensely on what we're doing, as long as they can provide. It's not an either or situation. It's not you just do psychedelics. If you can have a good therapist, a good talk therapist, and then do a big major psychedelic journey, you're going to be better off for it if you have a good therapist. And so these are parallel paths. And so it's just more of these systems talking to each other and having that. I don't think, to Ian's point again, I wouldn't go to the VA necessarily to do an ayahuasca journey. But if I have a therapist there that is kind of more understanding of it, and I can get some sort of private support or whatever that support looks like to go to a local psilocybin ceremony or an international psychedelic ceremony, and then come back and still have that support, still have this infrastructure, that's a beautiful system right there. That's kind of what needs to happen. It's a tricky system for sure, but there's definitely different layers of this. It needs to happen on the local level, it needs to happen on the VA level, and it needs to happen on that clinical research level. All of those are beneficial towards each other as long as they work together.
Yeah, the VA is a big, slow-moving ship that, in my opinion, also has no rudder or competent people working at it. But I do think that the VA has to, at some point, look at the data, because the data that's coming out of these nonprofits and these companies, it's overwhelming. It's a successful it's a successful push in almost every type of psychedelic I've seen, and we're having amazing results, and people's lives are changing. So the more of these smaller places, I believe, who are putting out the numbers of successful treatments, at some point the VA is just gonna, there's no other choice, they're gonna have to catch up.
Well, thank you all. I mean, I hope that that there is, a chance for much more integration there. I don't know if Rob, you were about to say. I mean, I know that New Haven may be a unique VA, but I know that they actually have been the site for some psychedelic studies. So it is happening, maybe in small ways.
Maybe someday in the not too distant future, we'll have some kind of psychedelic sensitive treatment offered at institutions like the VA. Even if what you were saying, Jesse, is that the clinicians there, even if they're not the ones kind of in ceremony or what have you, that they're able to provide the preparation and integration in a way that's effective. And at least fingers crossed, that sounds like a nice plan. Maybe we'll get there soon enough. I guess, to wrap up here, thank you all so much. Selfishly, this was really informative and really wonderful to hear from all of you, your personal experiences, and then, your perspectives on where things are and where they might go is all really in some ways quite inspirational and quite humbling as well. So I'm really grateful for y'all to have come and talked with us. I don't know, Halsey, if you have any other words to say here before we part.
I just think a really big thank you to Michael and Jesse and Ian for sharing their thoughts and experiences here today. You guys really made this a very cool event. And thanks to everyone who's been tuning in here with asking some great questions.
Yeah, thanks so much. For the really great participation and just the engagement here. Learned a lot from everybody. So look forward to seeing you at future events. If you're on our mailing list, that's how you can stay up to date. And if you're not on the mailing list, it's very easy to search Yale Psychedelic Science Group, and with a few clicks, you'll be able to get on our mailing list so that you'll be updated for any future events. And then who knows, maybe I'll see some of y'all at Horizons this weekend in New York. So feel free to reach out if you want to connect. But anyway, thank you all for coming. I hope you have a great evening wherever you are. Maybe it's morning, perhaps in Ukraine, for all I know. Regardless, thanks so much for joining us, and I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.